Paul McCartney taught Michael Jackson the most valuable lesson in the music business. Then Michael used that lesson to buy the Beatles catalog right from under Paul's nose. For $47.5 million. Their friendship ended that day. But what really happened in that business deal reveals something darker about the music industry that most people never see. It was 1981, Los Angeles, California. Michael Jackson was 23 years old and about to become the biggest star on the planet. He was in the studio recording what would become Thriller, but the album hadn't been released yet. Nobody knew that Michael was about to change music forever. But Michael had a problem that most young artists have when they first taste success. He was making millions of dollars from performing and recording, but he didn't understand where the real money was. He didn't understand the business side of music. And that lack of understanding was costing him a fortune. One afternoon during a recording break, Michael was talking with Quincy Jones, his producer. Quincy mentioned something casually, something that would change Michael's entire approach to the music business. He said, "You know, Michael, the smartest thing you can do in this industry isn't just make hit records. It's own the rights to music. By publishing catalogs. That's where the real wealth is." Michael didn't fully understand what Quincy meant, but the seed was planted. A few months later, Michael was invited to record a duet with Paul McCartney. The song was called "The Girl Is Mine" and it would appear on the Thriller album. This collaboration would bring together two of the biggest names in music history, the former Beatle who had conquered the 1960s and the young superstar who was about to dominate the 1980s. During the recording sessions, Michael and Paul became friends. Real friends. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Paul was 39, Michael was 23, but they connected on a level that went beyond age or experience. They were both child stars who had grown up in the spotlight. They both understood the pressure, the loneliness, and the strange reality of being famous from a very young age. They spent hours talking between takes, not just about music but about life, family, and the price of fame. One day during a break, they were sitting in the studio lounge and Michael asked Paul a question that would change everything. "Paul, how do you make real money in music? I mean, I'm selling millions of records, doing sold-out concerts, but I feel like I'm working so hard and the money isn't what it should be." Paul smiled, the knowing smile of someone who had learned this lesson the hard way decades earlier. "Michael," he said, "you don't make real money from performing or even from record sales. You make real money from owning the music itself. Publishing rights. That's the secret." Michael leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What do you mean?" Paul explained. "When someone writes a song, they own the composition. But most artists, especially when they're young, sign away their publishing rights to record labels or publishing companies. Those companies then collect money every time that song is played on the radio, performed in a concert, used in a movie, or covered by another artist. It's passive income that lasts forever. The Beatles," Paul continued with a slight bitterness in his voice, "we were kids when we signed our contracts. We didn't understand publishing. We gave away our rights to a man named Dick James who started Northern Songs Publishing Company. He owned our music, not us. Every time Yesterday plays on the radio, every time someone performs Hey Jude, the money goes to whoever owns the publishing rights, not to me, not to the songwriters." Michael was stunned. "You mean you don't own your own songs? The songs you wrote?" Paul shook his head. "No. I've been trying to buy them back for years, but the catalog keeps getting sold to different companies and the price keeps going up. Right now, ATV Music owns most of the Beatles catalog and they want so much money for it that even I can't afford it. But here's what I've learned," Paul said, leaning closer. "The smart move in this business is to buy other people's music catalogs. I've been doing it for years. I own the rights to songs by Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, and hundreds of other artists. Every day, every hour, those songs earn money for me and I don't have to do anything. It's the best investment you can make in this industry." Paul pulled out a small notebook and started sketching out how music publishing worked, showing Michael the difference between mechanical rights, performance rights, and synchronization rights. He explained how a single popular song could generate income from dozens of different sources simultaneously. Michael listened intently, asking questions, taking mental notes. This wasn't just interesting to him, it was revelatory. For the first time, Michael understood that being an artist wasn't just about making music. It was about owning assets that would generate wealth for decades. "Thank you for explaining this," Michael said sincerely. "This is the most valuable thing anyone has ever taught me about the business." Paul smiled warmly. "That's what friends are for. Learn from my mistakes. Don't let anyone take advantage of you. Own your masters, own your publishing, and if you can, buy catalogs. It's the smartest investment you'll ever make." Over the next year, Michael and Paul's friendship deepened. They recorded another duet together, Say Say Say, which became a massive hit. They visited each other's homes, talked on the phone regularly, and Paul even invited Michael to spend time with his family in England. Michael trusted Paul and Paul trusted Michael. But while their friendship was growing, something else was happening behind the scenes. Michael Jackson was studying. He was learning everything he could about music publishing. He hired lawyers and business managers who specialized in publishing rights. He started building a war chest of cash specifically for catalog acquisitions. And he was keeping an eye on one catalog in particular. The Beatles catalog owned by ATV Music. In 1984, Michael heard through his business advisors that ATV Music might be for sale. The company owned the publishing rights to over 4,000 songs, but the crown jewel was the Beatles catalog, 251 songs written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, arguably the most valuable music catalog in the world. Michael's advisors told him that ATV was asking for offers around $40 to $50 million. It was an enormous sum, more than most artists could even consider spending. But Michael had the Thriller money. Thriller had become the best-selling album of all time, generating hundreds of millions in revenue. Michael could afford it. But there was a complication. His friend Paul McCartney wanted to buy the Beatles catalog too. Paul had been trying to acquire it for years. He'd made offers, negotiated, and pleaded with ATV's owners. This was his music, songs he'd written with John Lennon, memories of his youth, his legacy. He desperately wanted to own them. Paul's highest offer was $20 million. It wasn't enough. ATV wanted more. Paul tried to convince Yoko Ono, John Lennon's widow, to partner with him and make a joint offer. Together they could afford a higher price. But Yoko refused. She didn't want to be in business with Paul. Their relationship had been strained since the Beatles broke up, and she didn't trust him. So Paul's offer stood at $20 million, and he waited, hoping ATV would accept or at least negotiate. He had no idea that his friend Michael Jackson was preparing a different kind of offer. Michael's advisors reached out to ATV Music quietly, without publicity, without alerting anyone in the industry. They made it clear that Michael was serious, that he had the funds available, and that he was willing to move quickly. In August 1985, Michael Jackson's team made an offer. $47.5 million. Cash. No financing, no complicated deal structure. Just a straight purchase. ATV accepted immediately. The deal was done before Paul even knew Michael was bidding. On August 14, 1985, Paul McCartney's lawyer called him at his home in London. "Paul, I have bad news. The Beatles catalog has been sold." Paul's heart sank. "Who bought it?" "Michael Jackson." Paul went silent. The phone line hummed with emptiness as the information slowly penetrated his consciousness. Michael? His Michael? The young man he'd befriended, the artist he'd mentored, the person he'd specifically taught about music publishing? Yes, the lawyer continued that he paid $47.5 million. The deal closed yesterday. Paul hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. He felt betrayed. Not because Michael had bought a music catalog, business is business after all, but because Michael had never told him. They were supposed to be friends. They talked regularly. Michael knew how much the Beatles catalog meant to Paul. He knew Paul was trying to buy it. And he'd gone behind Paul's back and bought it anyway. Paul tried calling Michael. Left messages. Michael didn't call back. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, Michael's people released a statement saying it was just business, nothing personal, and that Michael hoped Paul would understand. But Paul didn't understand. And he couldn't forgive. The friendship was over. In the years that followed, the story of Michael buying the Beatles catalog became legendary in the music industry. Some people saw it as a brilliant business move, a young artist learning from a mentor and then outmaneuvering him. Others saw it as a betrayal, a violation of trust between friends. Michael defended the purchase publicly several times. He said he'd offer to sell half the catalog to Paul so they could own it together, but Paul refused. Paul denied this ever happened. He said Michael never made any such offer and that the whole story was a fabrication to make Michael look better. The truth, as it often is, probably lies somewhere in between. What is undeniable is that Michael's purchase of the Beatles catalog was one of the smartest business decisions in music history. That $47.5 million investment grew in value exponentially. By the 1990s, the catalog was worth over $200 million. By the 2000s, it was worth nearly $500 million. Every time a Beatles song played on the radio, Michael Jackson earned money. Every time a movie used "Here Comes the Sun" or a commercial licensed "Revolution," Michael's bank account grew. The irony was almost poetic. Paul McCartney, the man who wrote these songs, who'd performed them for decades, who'd lived them, didn't own them. Michael Jackson, who had nothing to do with creating them, owned them completely. Paul spent years trying to buy the catalog back from Michael. He made offers, sent messages through intermediaries, even appealed to their old friendship. Michael refused every time. The catalog was too valuable, and Michael knew it. Their relationship remained frozen for nearly 2 decades. They saw each other occasionally at industry events and exchanged polite but cold greetings. The warmth was gone. The trust was gone. The friendship was gone. In 2009, Michael Jackson died. After his death, his estate continued to own the Beatles catalog until 2016, when Sony Music paid $750 million to buy out Michael's share. $750 million. That's what the catalog Michael bought for $47.5 million had become worth. Paul McCartney watched all of this from the sidelines. In interviews years later, he admitted that losing the catalog still hurt. Not just financially, though that certainly stung, but emotionally. It represented his youth, his partnership with John Lennon, his legacy. And it had been owned by someone else for over 30 years. In 2017, Paul finally won a legal battle that allowed him to start reclaiming some of his song rights under U.S. copyright law. But by then, he was 75 years old. He'd spent most of his life not owning the songs he'd written as a young man. The lesson of Michael and Paul's story isn't simple. It's not just about business savvy or betrayal. It's about the complicated intersection of friendship and money, trust and opportunity, loyalty and ambition. Paul McCartney taught Michael Jackson how the music business really worked. He shared knowledge that most industry veterans guard jealously. He did it because he liked Michael, because he saw a young artist who deserved to understand the system. Michael learned that lesson perfectly. Perhaps too perfectly. He took the knowledge Paul gave him and used it to buy the one thing Paul wanted most in the world. Was that betrayal? Was that just smart business? The answer probably depends on whether you value friendship or financial success more highly. What's undeniable is that one conversation between 2 friends in a recording studio in 1981 led to a business deal that changed both of their lives forever. It destroyed a friendship, created enormous wealth, and taught the entire music industry a lesson that artists still remember today. Own your music. Understand the business. And be very careful who you teach your secrets to, because they might use those secrets better than you ever did. Paul McCartney learned that lesson the hard way. And it cost him $47.5 million and a friend.